The mountains held no mercy that winter, their peaks looming like silent predators above the valley. When the snow came crashing down, it erased paths, buried hopes, and changed destinies in an instant. For Sierra Morgan, it meant finding shelter, in the most unlikely of places, a wolf's abandoned den. And for Nathaniel Redfeather, a Shoshone hunter carrying his own weight of loss, tracking a survivor through impossible terrain would become more than just another hunt. This is a story of survival against impossible odds, of finding connection in the wildest places, and how two broken souls forged something whole amid the unforgiving wilderness of the Teton Range. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The January storm descended without warning, turning the sky from crystal blue to bruised grey in mere minutes. Sierra Morgan strained to see through the thickening blizzard as she adjusted her pack straps. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour, and the mountain path she'd been following was now little more than a suggestion beneath the gathering snow. "Just a day hike," she muttered to herself, the words immediately stolen by the wind. "Just a quick winter trek. To clear your head, Sierra was no amateur in the mountains. At 32, she'd spent more time on alpine trails than in the apartment she kept in Jackson Hole, but even experienced hikers made mistakes. And hers had been simple, underestimating how quickly conditions could turn in the Tetons in January. The storm wasn't in the forecast. Her emergency beacon was sitting on her kitchen counter where she'd left it while changing batteries. The first rumble came as a deep vibration she felt through her boots more than heard. Sierra froze, her heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized what was coming. She'd been a wilderness guide long enough to know the sound of a mountain about to move. "No, no, no," she whispered, scanning for shelter as the rumble grew to a roar above her. The world became chaos. A wall of white surged down the mountainside, devouring everything in its path. Sierra ran, desperate for any protection, but the avalanche was faster. The last thing she remembered was diving behind an outcropping of rock as the wave of snow crashed over her, tumbling her like a leaf in rapids. Something struck her head. Then darkness. She woke to silence. Complete. Crushing. Silence and absolute darkness. For several terrifying moments, Sierra couldn't tell which way was up. Her body was wedged at an awkward angle, one arm pinned beside her, the other able to move slightly. Ice crystals formed with each labored breath. A hot trickle ran down her temple, blood freezing almost as soon as it seeped from the gash on her forehead. "Stay calm," she told herself, though her voice emerged as a strained whisper. "Panic kills faster than cold." Sierra had taught avalanche survival courses for 5 years before she quit guiding. The lessons came back to her now. Create an air pocket if possible. Conserve energy. Spit to determine which way is down. She worked methodically, using her free hand to clear snow from around her face, creating space to breathe. The pocket she managed to create revealed something unexpected. She wasn't packed solid in snow as she'd feared. She'd been thrown into some kind of hollow. With agonizing effort, Sierra maneuvered her body until she could reach the small flashlight attached to her pack strap. The weak beam revealed rough stone walls. Not just any hollow, a cave or den of some kind. The avalanche had blasted her. Through its entrance, which was now sealed by a wall of compacted snow, the space was cramped, but large enough for her to move. The air, while frigid, was breathable. "Small mercies," she murmured, wincing as she took inventory of her injuries. The gash on her forehead wasn't serious, but the pain radiating from her left leg told a different story. Sierra directed her light downward and swallowed hard at the unnatural angle of her ankle. Broken, maybe badly, her pack had survived with her, though much of her gear had been torn away in the tumbling descent. Sierra checked her phone. No signal, as expected. The screen flickered weakly, showing 4:12 p.m. and 11% battery before dying completely. Night would fall soon, and with it temperatures would plummet further. The den, and she was certain now that's what it was, bore signs of recent animal habitation. Tufts of grey fur clung to the edges of the rock. Scattered bones lay in one corner. Wolves. The realization should have terrified her, but Sierra found herself laughing instead, a sound edged with hysteria. From one predator to another, she said to the empty den. The wolf, at least, had abandoned this place before she'd crashed into it. Time passed with cruel slowness. Sierra examined her provisions. 1 energy bar, a half-liter of water, now partially frozen, a small first aid kit, a multi-tool, and extra layers in her pack. Not enough food or water for more than a day, but the extra clothing might keep her from freezing through the night. She splinted her ankle as best she could, gritting her teeth against waves of nausea as she worked. The pain was clarifying, keeping her from slipping into the dangerous comfort of surrender that cold often brought. Sierra knew the statistics. Search parties wouldn't begin looking for her until she was reported missing, which wouldn't happen until tomorrow at the earliest. When she failed to show up for her shift at the library, nobody else knew where she'd gone. Sierra had lived alone since Richard left 3 years ago, taking their dog, and shared dreams with him in Colorado. Her solitude, once a point of pride, now felt like a fatal mistake. As night deepened, the temperature in the den dropped to a level that made her previous discomfort seem luxurious. Sierra huddled against the back wall, wrapped in every layer she had, fighting to stay awake. Sleep in these conditions was dangerous. To keep herself conscious, she talked. First to herself, then to the absent wolf whose home she'd invaded. "I hope you're somewhere warmer," she said, her words visible as puffs in the beam of her flashlight, which she used sparingly to conserve its battery. "I didn't mean to steal your shelter." Her thoughts drifted to her mother, gone for 5 years. Now, Caroline Morgan had been the one to teach Sierra to love the mountains, to respect their power without fearing it. What would she say now? Probably something practical about surviving until morning, mixed with gentle chiding about hiking. Alone. Morning felt impossibly distant as Sierra slipped in and out of consciousness. The cold had become almost a living thing, pressing against her, seeping into her bones. Her injured leg throbbed in time with her heartbeat, which seemed to be slowing as the hours passed. In her moments of clarity, Sierra tried to formulate a plan. The snowpack blocking the entrance was too dense to dig through with her bare hands. Even if she could, her broken ankle meant she couldn't walk out. Her only real option was to conserve energy and hope someone found her before dehydration, cold, or her injuries claimed her. It was during one of her delirious moments, somewhere in the void between midnight and dawn, that Sierra heard it. A sound so faint she thought she'd imagined it. A rustle, then a low rumbling growl just beyond the wall of snow. Her pulse surged, driving back the lethargy of hypothermia. The wolf had returned. Sierra held her breath, listening. The growl came again, followed by the sound of paws digging at the snow. She reached for her multi-tool, folding out the small blade. It would be useless against a wolf, but the weight of it in her palm was reassuring. The digging grew more frantic. Sierra pressed herself against the far wall of the den, preparing for the worst. Had the scent of her blood drawn the animal back to its home? Would she be forced to fight for this small space that had temporarily saved her from the avalanche? The snow wall shuddered, then collapsed inward as a large shape burst through. Sierra raised her blade, a scream locked in her throat, then froze. In confusion, the shape that stood in the newly opened entrance wasn't a wolf, but a dog. A massive grey and white husky with piercing blue eyes that caught the remnants of moonlight filtering through the opening. The dog regarded her with what seemed like equal surprise, snow dusting its thick fur. Behind it, a beam of light cut through. The darkness, accompanied by a man's voice, deep and commanding. "Takoda, what is it, boy?" The light moved closer until it illuminated the entrance to the den. A face appeared, weathered, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that widened when they fell on Sierra. The man wore a thick fur-lined parka, his black hair pulled back from his face, a rifle slung across his back. "Hello?" he called cautiously. "Are you hurt?" Sierra could only stare, wondering if this was a hallucination born of cold and pain. The husky Takoda padded forward, sniffing at her curiously but keeping a respectful distance. Her voice cracked from dryness and disuse. "My leg. I can't walk." The man nodded once, decisively, then spoke to the dog in a language Sierra didn't recognize before switching back to English. "I'm coming in. Takoda found your scent. We've been tracking since dawn." "Tracking me?" Sierra managed, confused. "How did you know I was missing?" "Wasn't looking for you specifically," the man said, as he maneuvered his broad shoulders through the entrance. "Came up to check my family's hunting cabin after the avalanche. Saw signs of someone caught in the slide. Takoda did the rest." Up close, Sierra could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe mid-30s, with a face that spoke of both hardship and kindness. He knelt beside her, his movements careful, clinical, as he assessed her condition. "I'm Nathan Redfeather," he said, "and you're hypothermic with what looks like a compound fracture. We need to get you warmed up and off this mountain." Nathan. The name registered dimly through Sierra's fogged consciousness. A solid name, dependable sounding. "Sierra Morgan," she replied, her teeth beginning to chatter violently now that rescue seemed possible, as if her body had been holding itself together through sheer will until help arrived. How far to safety?" Nathan's expression grew serious. "My cabin's about 2 miles down, in good conditions, an easy hike. In this," he glanced at the opening where snow still swirled. "And with your leg, it'll be a challenge." He was already removing his outer parka, wrapping it around her despite her weak protests. The sudden warmth from the coat, still heated from his body, made tears spring to Sierra's eyes. "I can't take your coat," she managed. "You'll freeze." "I've got layers," he replied simply. "And I'm not the one who spent the night in a wolf's den." Sierra's eyes widened. "This really is a wolf den?" Nathan nodded, a hint of something like respect crossing his features. "Old one. Pack moved higher up the mountain last season. Lucky for you." He examined her makeshift splint, his touch gentle but confident. "This was good work. You know about mountain survival." "I was a guide," Sierra explained, wincing as he secured the splint more firmly. She trailed off, unsure why she was about to share her life story with this stranger. "Before something changed," Nathan finished for her, not pressing further. "Well, those skills kept you alive. Now we just need to get you down to my cabin. I've got a radio there, can call in emergency evac." The reality of her situation hit Sierra anew. Even with Nathan's help, moving would be excruciating. And what if the avalanche had destabilized other slopes? They could be walking into more danger. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nathan seemed to read her thoughts. "My people have navigated these mountains for generations," he said quietly. "I know which paths are safe, even after a slide like yesterday's." "Your people?" Sierra asked, trying to focus on conversation instead. Of the pain, as Nathan prepared a makeshift harness from rope in his pack. "Shoshone," he replied. "Eastern band. My grandfather taught me about these mountains before I could walk." Takoda whined softly from the entrance, clearly anxious to be moving. "He's right," Nathan said. "Daylight's precious. We need to go now." What followed was the most grueling journey of Sierra's life. Nathan fashioned a sled-like contraption using his gear and pieces of her pack. He cleared snow from the entrance until it was wide enough to pull her through, then maneuvered her onto the makeshift transport. The first movement sent white-hot pain shooting up from her ankle, causing Sierra to bite through her lip to keep from screaming. Nathan paused, his eyes meeting hers with a steady calmness that somehow helped her breathe through the agony. "The initial movement is the worst," he said. "Try to focus on something else. Tell me about the library you work at." Sierra blinked in surprise. "How did you know I work at a library?" Nathan's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile as he resumed pulling her carefully through the snow. "Book in your pack, library barcode. I noticed details." The conversation, halting and strained as it was, did help distract Sierra from the pain as Nathan navigated the treacherous terrain. Dakota led the way, occasionally circling back as if checking on their progress. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky remained heavily overcast, the air sharp enough to cut. Nathan moved with surprising grace for such a powerfully built man, finding paths where Sierra saw only impassable drifts. He spoke little, conserving energy, but when he did, his words were thoughtful, measured. "The mountains don't care who you are," he said during one brief rest, as he checked Sierra's pulse and gave her small sips from his thermos of hot tea. "They don't distinguish between experienced and amateur. They're not malicious or kind. They simply are." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" Sierra asked, her voice weak but with a hint of wry humor that surprised even her. Nathan's dark eyes crinkled slightly. "It's supposed to be true. Sometimes that's better than comfort." They continued their slow descent, the landscape gradually changing from the stark white devastation of the Avalanche zone to more sheltered forest. Sierra drifted in and out of awareness, the cold and pain creating a dreamlike state where time lost meaning. She became aware they had stopped moving when Dakota's bark pierced her consciousness. Opening her eyes, Sierra saw a small cabin nestled among towering pines, smoke curling from its stone chimney. "We're here," Nathan said, his own voice rough with exertion. "Let's get you inside." The cabin's interior was sparse but neat, dominated by a large stone fireplace where flames already danced. Nathan had somehow kept it going during his absence. With careful movements, he transferred Sierra to a narrow bed covered in thick quilts, then set about elevating her injured leg and examining it more thoroughly. "The break is bad," he said finally. "You need a proper hospital, but the storm's moving in again. We might be stuck here until tomorrow." Sierra nodded weakly, the warmth of the cabin already seeping into her frozen limbs, bringing with it a wave of exhaustion so profound she could barely keep her eyes open. "Thank you," she managed, "for finding me. For bringing me here." Nathan moved to the cabin's small kitchenette, his back to her, as he prepared something on the ancient wood stove. "Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." As Sierra drifted toward sleep, she caught a glimpse of Nathan, kneeling beside Dakota, speaking softly to the dog in his native language, one hand resting on the animal's head. The image followed her into dreams, this solemn, capable stranger and his faithful dog, who had somehow found her against impossible odds. Outside, the wind began to rise again, snow whispering against the cabin windows like secrets being told. Inside, for the first time since the mountain had tried to claim her, Sierra Morgan felt something other than fear, something that felt oddly like hope. Sierra woke to the smell of pine and wood smoke. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. The unfamiliar ceiling, the weight of heavy quilts, the persistent throbbing in her leg. Then memory returned in a rush. The avalanche, the wolf's den, the rescue. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Pale morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, casting geometric patterns across rough-hewn floorboards. Sierra pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain shooting through her injured ankle. "You shouldn't move yet." Nathan's voice came from the far corner where he sat, carving something from a piece of cedar, his hands working with practiced precision. He set aside his project and moved to her bedside, his steps nearly silent on the wooden floor. "How long was I asleep?" Sierra asked, her voice hoarse. "Almost 20 hours. Nathan poured water from a kettle into a mug, adding dried leaves from a small tin. "Your body needed it. You were in the early stages of hypothermia when I found you." Sierra accepted the steaming mug, the warmth seeping into her stiff fingers. 20 hours? What about search parties? People might be looking for me by now. I radioed down to the ranger station yesterday. Let them know you're safe, injured but stable. He gestured toward a ham radio set up on a small desk near the window. The storm's picked up again. Rescue helicopter can't fly in these conditions. Sierra sipped the tea, something herbal with a hint of sweetness, and glanced toward the windows. Beyond the glass, snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, the world beyond reduced to white static. "So we're stuck here." Nathan nodded, moving back to the small wood stove where a pot simmered. "For at least another day, maybe 2, depending on the weather." He stirred the contents of the pot. "How's the pain?" Sierra shifted slightly, testing. "Manageable. I've had worse." Nathan's eyes flicked to her face, clearly skeptical but not challenging her assessment. "I've reset and splinted your ankle as best I could. It's a clean break, but you'll need surgery once we get you to Jackson." The cabin, which Sierra could now see properly in daylight, was smaller than she'd initially thought. Just one main room with what appeared to be a small bathroom, partitioned off at the back, practical and efficient, like its occupant. A collection of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with worn volumes on tracking, botany, and local history. Handmade snowshoes and hunting gear hung on pegs near the door. "Is this your home?" Sierra asked, taking in the sparse yet comfortable surroundings. Nathan shook his head as he ladled whatever was in the pot into a bowl. "Just a hunting cabin that's been in my family for generations. I come up here to check on it after storms, hunt when the season's right." He brought the bowl to her. "My actual home is down in the valley, near the reservation." The food was a hearty stew, rich with game meat and root vegetables. Sierra hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful hit her tongue. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth and substance. "This is good," she said. "Thank you." Nathan accepted the compliment with a slight nod, returning to his seat and the carving he'd set aside. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the wind's insistent moan and the occasional shifting of logs in the fireplace. Sierra found herself studying her rescuer, noting details she'd been too pained and disoriented to register before. Nathan Redfeather was perhaps in his mid-30s, with broad shoulders and the lean, powerful build of someone who lived physically rather than sedentarily. His hands, strong and sure as they worked the wood, bore small scars, the badges of a life spent outdoors. His face, with its high cheekbones and straight nose, remained largely impassive, but his dark eyes held depths she couldn't quite fathom. "Where's your dog?" Sierra asked, suddenly aware of Dakota's absence. "Under the bed," Nathan replied without looking up. "He's been keeping watch over you." Sierra peered over the edge of the mattress and met Dakota's alert blue gaze. The husky's tail thumped once in acknowledgement. "He found me," she said softly. "How?" Nathan set down his carving knife, turning the wooden piece in his hands. Dakota was bred from working sled dogs and wolves 7 generations back. He can track scents buried under feet of snow. When I saw signs of someone caught in the avalanche path, I trusted him to find whatever was left. "You didn't expect to find me alive," Sierra realized. "No," Nathan admitted, his honesty refreshing in its directness. "I've recovered too many bodies from these mountains to expect miracles." "Yet, you still looked." "Everyone deserves to be found." Something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "Dead or alive." Sierra sensed a story behind those words but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Have you lived here your whole life?" "Mostly." Nathan resumed his carving, thin curls of cedar falling to the floor. "Left for college, University of Wyoming, forestry and wildlife management. Came back after. To the reservation? To the mountains." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "The reservation is where my family is. The mountains are where I belong." Sierra understood that sentiment all too well. It was why she'd left her position at an academic library in Denver 3 years ago, trading security and advancement for the small public library in Jackson Hole, just to be near these peaks. "I get that," she said. "Cities never felt right. To me either." Nathan studied her with renewed interest. "Yet you stopped guiding." It wasn't a question, but Sierra felt compelled to answer anyway. "After an accident. Not mine. One of my clients. Advanced hiker who thought he knew better than the weather reports. I told him to turn back. He didn't listen." She stared into her empty bowl. "Search and rescue found him 3 days later." "Not your fault," Nathan said. The words simple but firm. That's what the investigation concluded. Sierra's smile held no humor. "Didn't make it any easier to lead groups after that." Nathan nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "So you became a librarian instead?" "Returned to it, actually. It was my first career." Sierra leaned back against the pillows, fatigue washing over her despite her long rest. "Books don't make foolish choices or ignore warnings." A hint of amusement touched Nathan's eyes. "No, they just encourage people to make their own foolish choices." Sierra laughed, then winced as the movement jarred her leg. "Fair point." Nathan set aside his carving, what looked to be an owl taking shape from the cedar, and rose to check on her splint. His touch was clinical, but gentle, as he examined the swelling. "I need to elevate this more," he said. "And the bandages should be changed." He worked efficiently, unwrapping the makeshift splint with deft movements that minimized her discomfort. Sierra bit her lip as the pressure eased, revealing her ankle, swollen and mottled with bruising. "It looks worse than yesterday," she said, "but the alignment is better." Nathan reached for a small box containing medical supplies. "I'm going to apply a poultice to help with the swelling. It might sting." The mixture he spread over her injury smelled of pine and something sharper, medicinal. It burned initially, then cooled, providing unexpected relief. "What is that?" Sierra asked. "Old family remedy. Yarrow, white pine resin, and a few other things." Nathan rewrapped her ankle with clean bandages. "My grandmother was a healer, taught me which plants help and which harm." "Is that why you have all those books on botany?" "Partly." Nathan secured the new splint. "Knowledge gets lost between generations if you don't write it down. I'm documenting what she taught me before it's forgotten." This glimpse into his purpose intrigued Sierra. "You're preserving your cultural knowledge?" "Trying to." Nathan moved, away to wash his hands in a basin. "My people have already lost too much. Language, stories, medicine, they're all connected to this land." Outside, the storm continued unabated, snow piling against the windows. Dakota emerged from under the bed, stretching before padding to the door with a questioning look at his master. "He needs to go out," Nathan explained, reaching for his heavy coat. "I'll check our supplies while I'm at it." Sierra watched as man and dog disappeared into the white void beyond the door, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The cabin felt different without Nathan's steady presence. Smaller somehow, less secure despite its solid walls. She hadn't realized. How quickly she'd come to depend on this stranger's calm competence. Using her arms, Sierra maneuvered herself to a more upright position, wanting to take stock of her physical state. Beyond the ankle, her body was a catalogue of minor injuries. Bruises spreading across her ribs, scrapes on her palms, the cut on her forehead now scabbed over. Yet considering what could have happened, she'd been remarkably lucky, or perhaps luck had nothing to do with it. If Nathan hadn't decided to check his cabin after the avalanche, if he hadn't spotted signs of someone caught in the slide, if his dog hadn't been capable of tracking her scent through the snow. The door pushed open, admitting a gust of frigid air and snow before Nathan shouldered it closed again. Dakota shook himself, sending a spray of melting snowflakes across the floor. "It's getting worse out there," Nathan said, removing his coat and hanging it to dry near the fire. "We might be here longer than I thought." Sierra felt a twinge of guilt. "I'm keeping you from getting back to your life." Nathan's expression remained neutral as he fed another log to the fire. "I was planning to stay up here for a few days anyway, checking trap lines, hunting if the weather cleared." He knelt by the hearth, warming his hands. "The only difference is the company. Unwanted company," Sierra said wryly. "Unexpected," Nathan corrected. "Not unwanted." The simple statement settled between them, neither sentimental nor dismissive, just honest, like everything else about him. Seemed to be, as the day progressed, they fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Nathan prepared another pot of tea, then helped Sierra to the small bathroom, respectfully waiting outside until she managed her needs and called for assistance returning to bed. He checked her temperature and pulse periodically, his concern professional rather than hovering. When Sierra asked for something to read, Nathan brought her several books from his collection. She selected a worn copy of Aldo Leopold's A Sand County Almanac, settling into its familiar wisdom while Nathan returned to his carving. "You read conservation literature?" he asked, noting her choice. "I specialized in environmental studies. In collections at my university library," Sierra replied. "Leopold required reading. Most people know science but miss poetry." Nathan tested the edge of the carving with his thumb. "They see resources instead of relationships." Sierra glanced up. "From the page, that sounds like something Leopold would say. He learned it from people like my ancestors." Nathan's voice held no bitterness, just quiet certainty. Indigenous people understood ecological connections long before Western science had terms. For them, the conversation flowed naturally from there, about conservation, the changing climate's impact on the Tetons, the delicate balance of predator and prey in the ecosystem. Sierra found herself engaged in the most stimulating discussion she'd had in months, impressed by Nathan's knowledge and perspective. As afternoon faded toward evening, Nathan prepared a simple dinner of jerky softened in broth with dried berries and pine nuts. They ate in companionable silence, the storm providing a constant backdrop of wind and occasional thuds as snow slid from the roof. "Tell me about your library," Nathan said suddenly. "In Jackson." Sierra smiled, surprised by his interest. "It's small but mighty. 2 full-time librarians, including me, 3 part-timers. We serve the whole county, which means everything from tourist information to research support for the high school to children's story hours." She paused, realizing she was rambling. "It's not glamorous, but it matters. Libraries always mattered. To me, growing up," Nathan said, "reservation schools didn't always have current textbooks, but the mobile library brought new books every month, opened worlds. That's why I became a librarian," Sierra admitted. "I wanted to open worlds for people." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Different paths, same purpose. How so?" "I track animals, guide hunters, map migration patterns." Nathan gestured toward the window, where the storm continued unabated. I help people navigate the physical world safely. You help them navigate knowledge. The comparison warmed Sierra in a way the fire couldn't. This man she'd known for barely a day somehow saw connections others missed. As night descended, Nathan built up the fire and prepared to sleep on a bedroll near the hearth, giving Sierra the only bed. Despite her protests, he was firm. You're injured, you need proper rest, and you need to be functional to get us both off this mountain when the storm breaks, Sierra countered. You can't do that sleeping on the floor. Nathan's expression softened slightly. I've slept on frozen ground in blizzards worse than this. The floor of a warm cabin is luxury by comparison. Too exhausted to argue further, Sierra conceded. But as she watched Nathan settle onto his simple bedroll, Dakota curling beside him, she felt a strange mixture of gratitude and something harder to define, a connection forming despite the circumstances of their meeting. Nathan, she said softly as he prepared to extinguish the lantern, thank you, not just for finding me, but for... She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate exactly what she meant. He seemed to understand anyway. Get some rest, Sierra. Tomorrow's another day. The lantern light faded, leaving only the fire's glow illuminating the cabin. Sierra lay awake, listening to the storm and the occasional crackling of embers. From his place by the hearth, Nathan's breathing had already deepened into sleep, the efficient rest of someone accustomed to taking it when available. Sierra's thoughts drifted to her small apartment in Jackson, to the library patrons who might be wondering about her absence, to the search parties that had been notified but couldn't reach her. Strange how distant that life felt now, as if the Avalanche had carried her not just into a wolf's den, but into some parallel existence where different rules applied. Outside, the wind howled with renewed ferocity, rattling the windows. Inside, the fire popped and hissed, sending shadows dancing across the ceiling. Sierra closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink into the peculiar safety of this moment, stranded in a storm with a stranger who was rapidly becoming something else entirely. As sleep claimed her, Sierra's last conscious thought was that surviving the avalanche might not be the most significant thing to happen to her on this mountain. Dakota's low growl woke her sometime in the night. The cabin was dark, except for the dull red glow of banked coals. Sierra could make out Nathan's silhouette, already upright and alert, one hand on the dog's ruff. "What is it?" she whispered. "Something outside." Nathan's voice was barely audible. "Stay quiet." Sierra strained to hear over the persistent moan of the wind. Then she caught it, a scratching, snuffling sound near the cabin's eastern wall. Not the random noise of branch against wood, but something deliberate, investigating. Nathan moved silently to the window, peering out into the darkness. The set of his shoulders changed, tension replaced by recognition. "Wolf," he said softly. "Probably smelled the food or sensed Dakota." "Is it dangerous?" Sierra asked, her heart racing despite Nathan's calm demeanor. "Not from inside." Nathan remained at the window. "It's just curious. Hungry, maybe." The avalanche disrupted hunting territories. Sierra thought of the den where Nathan had found her. Could it be from the pack that used that den? Possibly. Nathan glanced back at her. They would have scattered when the slide came through, then regrouped. This one might be scouting. The scratching continued briefly, then stopped. A long, mournful howl rose above the storm, a sound so primal it made the hair on Sierra's arms stand up. After a moment, another howl answered from somewhere distant. "They're calling to each other," Nathan explained, returning to his bedroll. "Finding their way back together after the disruption." Dakota whined softly, but settled when Nathan placed a hand on his head, murmuring what sounded like reassurances in his native language. "Will they be okay?" Sierra asked. "The wolves, I mean. After losing their den?" Nathan looked at her with quiet appreciation. as if her concern for the predators rather than fear of them revealed something significant. "Wolves survived ice ages and human persecution," he said. "They'll adapt to an avalanche. They always find their way back to what matters." As Sierra drifted back towards sleep, that thought followed her, of finding ways back to what matters, of adapting to sudden devastation, of calling through storms until someone answers. Perhaps being rescued wasn't just about being found in a physical sense, but about being reconnected to a world you feared lost forever. With unexpected clarity, Sierra woke to sunlight streaming through frost-laced windows, transforming the cabin's interior into a kaleidoscope of gold and crystal. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world recreated in pristine white. Nathan was already awake, standing at the window with a mug of something steaming in his hand. He turned when he heard her stir, his usual stoic expression softened by the morning light. "Storm's broken," he said, nodding toward the view outside. "Radio says rescue services can fly in by afternoon." The news should have filled Sierra with unalloyed relief. Instead, she felt a curious reluctance tugging at her, a sense that returning to civilization meant the end of something barely begun. "That's good," she managed, pushing herself upright. Her ankle throbbed less fiercely this morning, though. Movement still sent daggers of pain up her leg. Nathan crossed to her bedside, handing her a mug of pine-scented tea. "How's the pain?" "Better." Sierra took a grateful sip. "Your grandmother's poultice works wonders." He nodded, satisfaction briefly crossing his features. "I'll check the splint before we prepare to move you." The practicality in his voice steadied her. Of course they would part ways once she reached medical care. What had she expected? This wasn't some romantic wilderness fantasy. She had a life to return to, responsibilities, a job, and Nathan clearly had his own responsibilities in these mountains. "I need to signal our location," Nathan continued, already pulling on his heavy coat. "Make it easier for the helicopter to spot us. Dakota and I will be back soon." The door closed behind him with a soft thud, leaving Sierra alone with her thoughts and the spectacular view outside. The Tetons stood in sharp relief against the cobalt sky, their peaks gleaming with fresh snow. From this elevation, she could see the path of the Avalanche, a great swath carved through the forest below, like a giant's footprint. Somewhere in that destructive path lay the wolf den, where she'd nearly died, where Nathan had found her against all odds. The memory felt simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Using the headboard for support, Sierra managed to pull herself into a fully seated position. Her body protested every movement, muscles stiff from inactivity and injury. But the pain was clarifying, a reminder that she was alive despite nature's best efforts. The cabin looked different in full daylight, with no storm obscuring the view. Smaller, yet somehow more intricate in its simplicity. She noticed details previously overlooked. Hand-carved hooks by the door, a collection of smooth river stones arranged on the windowsill, the fine craftsmanship of the bookshelves. Everything spoke of care, of connection to this place. Sierra's gaze fell on Nathan's carving, now complete and placed on the table. The wooden owl was exquisite in its detail, each feather rendered with precision, its eyes conveying an uncanny wisdom. She resisted the urge to reach for it, to feel the grain of the cedar beneath her fingers. Dakota appeared at the window, breath fogging the glass as he peered in at her. A moment later, the door opened, bringing with it a gust of crisp mountain air, and Nathan, his cheeks reddened from cold. "Signal's set," he said, removing his gloves. "Smoke marker on the ridge. They'll see it once they clear the western pass." Sierra nodded, suddenly awkward in the face of their impending separation. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," she began. Nathan shook his head, cutting off her words. "There's no debt between us." There is, Sierra insisted. You saved my life. You could have died searching for me in those conditions. Nathan busied himself with building up the fire. The mountain decides who lives and dies. I was just the instrument. That's a convenient way to avoid acknowledgement, Sierra said, a hint of challenge in her voice. Nathan turned to face her, something like amusement flickering in his dark eyes. Would you prefer effusive gratitude? It wouldn't suit either of us. Sierra laughed despite herself. No, I suppose not. She watched him move about the cabin with efficient grace. But I would like to know more about the man who found me. Before we part ways, Nathan paused in his preparations. What do you want to know? Whatever you'd share. Sierra met his gaze steadily. You know I was a guide who quit after losing someone. I work in a library, that I hike alone because I prefer my own company. But I know almost nothing about you beyond your name, and that you have Shoshone heritage. Nathan considered this, then settled into the chair beside her bed. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Forest Service. I track predator populations, wolves, mountain lions, bears, monitor their territories, advocate for conservation. He gestured to the cabin around them. This was my grandfather's hunting cabin. I come here to connect with the land the way he taught me. Your grandfather, Sierra prompted, the one who taught you the mountains. Nathan nodded, his expression softening with memory. Joseph Redfeather, he was a tracker, a hunter, a storyteller, led search and rescue operations on these mountains for 30 years. Following in his footsteps, Sierra observed, trying to. Nathan's gaze drifted to the window. He could read these mountains like you read your books, said they spoke if you knew how to listen. Is that how you found me? Listening to the mountain? Nathan's focus returned to her. Partly. Tracking is observation plus intuition. You notice a branch broken at human height, not animal. Snow disturbed in a pattern that suggests a body tumbling. Then you trust the feeling that pulls you in one direction instead of another. Science and spirituality, Sierra said. Like your work, biology and traditional knowledge combined. They're not separate, Nathan replied. Just different languages describing the same reality. Sierra found herself drawn to this philosophy, so unlike the rigid categories academia had trained her to respect. Your family must be proud, continuing, both traditions, something closed in Nathan's expression. My parents wanted different paths for me, college, career off the reservation, success by mainstream standards. But you came back. After my grandfather died, Nathan confirmed. Someone needed to remember what he knew, to keep those connections alive. Sierra sensed there was more to this story. Tensions unresolved, choices that had come with costs. But before she could ask further, a distant mechanical thrum filtered through the cabin walls. Helicopter, Nathan said, rising. Earlier than expected. The moment fractured, their brief connection giving way to logistical necessities. Nathan moved with practiced efficiency, gathering her few belongings, checking her splint one final time, and wrapping her in extra layers against the cold journey ahead. They won't land here, he explained as he worked. Too many trees. They'll lower a basket for you at the clearing where I set the signal. And you? Sierra asked, sudden alarm coursing through her. You're coming too, right? Nathan shook his head. I'll stay. Check my trap lines as planned. Hike down when I'm finished. The idea of leaving him behind in this remote cabin struck Sierra with unexpected force. But you should be recognized. For the rescue, the ranger station should know what you did. They know where to find me if they need a statement. Nathan's tone was final as he fashioned a makeshift stretcher from blankets and wooden poles. I don't need recognition. The helicopters. Rhythmic beating grew louder. Nathan lifted Sierra onto the stretcher with gentle strength, his hands sure and steady, despite her weight. She winced as her ankle shifted. Sorry, he murmured, adjusting her position. Almost done. Sierra looked up at him, searching his impassive, your face. Will I see you again? The question surprised them both. Nathan paused, his dark eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. Jackson's a small town, he said finally. Our paths might cross. It wasn't a promise, but Sierra sensed it wasn't a dismissal either. Something unspoken hung between them, a connection forged in extremity that neither was quite ready to relinquish. The journey to the clearing was mercifully brief. Nathan carried the stretcher with Dakota leading the way, navigating the snow-laden path with the same quiet confidence he'd shown throughout their time together. The forest opened to reveal a wide meadow where a column of smoke rose from Nathan's signal marker. The helicopter hovered overhead, wind from its rotors sending snow swirling in chaotic patterns. A Forest Service medic was lowered on a cable, touching down several yards away and trudging through the deep snow toward them. "Miss Morgan?" the medic shouted over the helicopter's roar. "I'm Davis with Forest Service Rescue. We're going to get you to Jackson Hospital." Sierra barely heard him, her attention fixed on Nathan, who had set down the stretcher and stepped back, already creating distance between them. She reached out, catching his wrist. "Nathan," he knelt beside her, his expression more open than she'd yet seen it. "You survived," he said simply. "Remember that strength." Then he was gone, melting back toward the tree line with Dakota at his heels, leaving Sierra to the efficient ministrations of the rescue team. They transferred her to a proper stretcher, secured her for the airlift, attached monitoring equipment, while asking clinical questions about her condition. As the basket rose, swaying slightly beneath the helicopter, Sierra kept her eyes fixed on the spot where Nathan had disappeared. Just before the trees swallowed him completely, he turned back. Even from a distance, she felt the weight of his gaze following her ascent. Then he was gone, and Sierra was airborne, the wilderness falling away beneath her. The Tetons spread out in panoramic glory, miles of untouched snow and ancient stone. Somewhere in that vastness lay a wolf's den and a hunter's cabin, two shelters that had saved her life. The hospital in Jackson Hole was a blur of bright lights, concerned faces, and medical terminology. X-rays confirmed what Nathan had already diagnosed, a clean break requiring surgical repair. Sierra answered the same questions repeatedly for different personnel. How she'd gotten caught in the avalanche, how long she'd been in the den, how she'd been found. With each retelling, Nathan's role grew more significant in her mind. The doctors marveled at her condition given the circumstances. "If that Shoshone wildlife officer hadn't found you when he did, we'd be having a very different conversation," the orthopedic surgeon told her bluntly. "Or no conversation at all." Sierra's parents arrived from Denver that evening, their faces etched with worry that slowly eased as they saw her alert and stable. Her mother fussed over the hospital room's temperature, while her father peppered the medical staff with questions about recovery timelines. "We can take you back to Denver for your recovery," her mother suggested, smoothing Sierra's hair with nervous fingers. "Your old room is just as you left it," Sierra shook her head. "I'm staying in Jackson, Mom. My life is here now. But, honey, you'll need help during rehabilitation. And that tiny apartment of yours has stairs." "I'll figure it out," Sierra said with quiet determination. "This is home now." Her parents exchanged concerned glances but didn't press further. They'd learned years ago that their daughter's independence was non-negotiable. Surgery was scheduled for the following morning. Sierra drifted in and out of medicated sleep, her dreams filled with snow and wolves and a man with eyes like midnight. Each time she woke, she half expected to see Nathan in the doorway, solid and watchful. But the only visitors were hospital staff, her parents, and eventually her co-worker from the library, Maggie, who brought flowers and community concern. "Everyone's been asking about you," Maggie said, arranging yellow daffodils on the windowsill. "The whole town knows about your Avalanche adventure by now." "The whole town?" Sierra asked, suddenly alert. "Have you heard anything about the man who found me? Nathan Redfeather?" Maggie's expression turned curious. "The wildlife biologist. Only that he radioed in your rescue. The Forest Service chief mentioned him at the town meeting last night." She studied Sierra's face with growing interest. "Why? Is there more to the story?" Sierra hesitated, uncertain how to articulate the complex emotions surrounding her time with Nathan. "He saved my life," she said finally. "I just want to thank him properly." Maggie's smile turned knowing. "Well, when you're back on your feet, maybe you can do that. Though I hear he keeps to himself mostly. Comes into town for supplies, meetings with the Forest Service, then disappears back to the mountains." "That sounds like him," Sierra murmured, a small smile tugging at her lips. The surgery went smoothly, pins inserted, bone properly aligned, prognosis for full recovery, excellent with proper rehabilitation. Sierra emerged from anesthesia with a foggy sense of having completed one journey only to begin another. 2 days later, as Sierra was preparing for discharge, a nurse appeared with a small package. "This was left at the front desk for you," she said, placing it on Sierra's bedside table. "No note, no name." Sierra waited until the nurse left before reaching for the package, a simple box wrapped in brown paper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped it, some instinct telling her who it was from before she saw the contents. Inside lay the carved cedar owl she'd admired in Nathan's cabin. Up close, its craftsmanship was even more remarkable, each feather distinct, its eyes conveying watchful wisdom. Beside it was a small pouch of dried herbs that released the now familiar scent of Nathan's healing poultice when she opened it. No note, no message. None was needed. Sierra closed her fingers around the wooden owl, its smooth contours fitting perfectly in her palm. The fact that Nathan had come to the hospital, had sought her out while somehow avoiding being seen, touched her deeply. It was a gesture that acknowledged their connection without demanding anything in return. As her father helped her into the wheelchair that would take her to his waiting car, Sierra tucked both gifts into her bag. She would place the owl on her own windowsill, a reminder of strength found in unexpected places. And she would use the poultice as her ankle healed, a tangible connection to the man and the mountains that had changed her. Outside, the January sun sparkled on snow-covered streets. Sierra tilted her face upward, breathing in the crisp air that carried hints of pine and possibility. Somewhere beyond the town, in the wilderness she'd always loved, Nathan Redfeather was moving through his world, tracking, listening, preserving. What mattered? Their paths had crossed once through circumstance and survival. Whether they would cross again remained to be seen. But as her father's car pulled away from the hospital, Sierra found herself smiling at the Tetons rising majestically in the distance. Some connections once forged could not be broken by mere separation, like the wolves finding each other after. The avalanche scattered them, calling through the storm until they reconnected. Sierra sensed this was not the end of her story with Nathan Redfeather. It was merely the first chapter. Spring came to Jackson Hole in fits and starts, warm days that coaxed crocuses from the soil, followed by sudden squalls that buried them again. Sierra watched the changing season from her apartment window, her healing ankle propped on an ottoman as she sorted through the library's latest acquisitions. 3 months had passed since the avalanche. Her cast had been replaced by a walking boot 2 weeks ago, and each day brought increased mobility and decreased pain. The physical therapist was pleased with her progress, remarking on her determination during rehabilitation sessions. "Most patients I see want the easy way," he told her during their last appointment. "You push yourself right to the edge." Sierra hadn't explained that after surviving an avalanche and a night in a wolf's den, physical therapy hardly seemed challenging. Her perspective had shifted, the scale of what constituted hardship forever altered. The wooden owl sat on her windowsill, its carved eyes witnessing her gradual recovery. She'd positioned it to face the mountains, as if it could see beyond the town, to wherever Nathan Redfeather might be. Despite Maggie's occasional probing questions, Sierra had shared little about her rescuer beyond the basic facts. The time they'd spent together in the cabin felt too personal, too significant, to reduce to break-room conversation. She hadn't seen Nathan since the rescue. According to Forest Service updates that Sierra followed religiously, he'd been tracking wolf populations in the northern range, documenting their recovery after the avalanche had disrupted their territories. Sometimes she caught herself scanning the streets when she ventured downtown for groceries or appointments, searching for a tall figure with broad shoulders and quiet steps. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Sierra set aside the book. She'd been examining and reached for her crutches. Moving carefully, she made her way to the door and peered through the peephole. Maggie stood in the hallway, her arms laden with paper grocery bags. Sierra unlatched the door. "Dinner delivery," Maggie announced, bustling past Sierra into the small kitchen. "And before you protest about not needing help, remember that I get to eat half of whatever I cook." Sierra smiled, following her friend. At a more measured pace. "I wasn't going to protest. Your cooking beats my microwave meals any day." Maggie began unpacking fresh vegetables, chicken, and a bottle of wine. "How was PT today?" "Good. Dr. Winters says I might graduate to a cane next week if the swelling stays down." Sierra lowered herself onto a kitchen stool, watching as Maggie moved confidently around her kitchen. "You really don't have to keep checking on me, you know." "Friends feed friends who are injured," Maggie replied, chopping an onion with practiced ease. "Besides, you'd do the same for me." Sierra couldn't argue with that. Since returning from the hospital, she'd been overwhelmed by the community support, colleagues covering her shifts, neighbors shoveling her walkway, friends delivering meals. Jackson might be small, but it took care of its own. "Oh, before I forget," Maggie said, reaching into her purse, "this came for you at the library today. Looks official." She handed Sierra an envelope bearing the Forest Service logo. Sierra opened it, curious, then felt her heart rate accelerate as she scanned the contents. "What is it?" Maggie asked, noticing her expression. "An invitation," Sierra said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "The Forest Service is hosting a presentation on predator conservation next week. They're featuring research on how the wolves adapted after the avalanche disrupted their territory." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, presented by your mysterious mountain rescuer?" Sierra nodded, still staring at the letter. "It says Nathan Redfeather will be discussing his findings with an emphasis on traditional ecological knowledge, alongside scientific data." "Well, that's perfect," Maggie exclaimed. "You've been wanting to thank him properly, right? Now's your chance." Sierra ran her finger over the embossed letterhead. The presentation was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community center. Her first day without the walking boot, if her physical therapist's prediction proved correct. "I'll need a ride," she said finally. Maggie grinned. "Already volunteering. I'm curious to meet this wildlife biologist who left handcrafted gifts, but no note." Sierra's gaze drifted to the owl on her windowsill. "He's not what you're expecting." "Which is exactly why I'm intrigued," Maggie replied, turning back to her. "Cooking. Now, tell me more about this presentation while I finish dinner." The community center was crowded by the time Sierra and Maggie arrived the following Thursday. Sierra moved carefully with her new cane, still adjusting to the freedom of movement after weeks of restricted mobility. She'd taken extra care with her appearance, nothing flashy, just her best jeans, a soft blue sweater that matched her eyes, and her hair loose around her shoulders. "Quite a turnout," Maggie observed as they found seats near the middle of the room. "Your rescuer must be popular." "Or the subject is," Sierra replied, scanning the audience. Wolf conservation is controversial in ranching communities. Some of these people might be here to challenge the findings. The room continued to fill with an eclectic mix of townspeople, outdoor enthusiasts in fleece and Gore-Tex, ranchers in worn denim and cowboy hats, environmental activists with buttons and patches declaring their allegiance, and curious citizens. Just there for the community event, a Forest Service ranger stepped up to the podium to introduce the evening's presentation. Sierra only half listened to the preliminaries, her attention focused on the side door where Nathan would likely enter. When it finally opened, she felt a jolt of recognition so powerful she gripped her cane tighter. Nathan looked different in this setting, his long hair tied back neatly, his usual outdoor gear replaced by a button-down shirt and clean jeans. Yet his presence remained unmistakable. A quiet gravity that drew attention without demanding it. He carried a slim laptop and a cardboard tube that likely contained maps or charts. As he set up his presentation, his eyes scanned the audience. Briefly, Sierra held her breath when his gaze swept over her section, but he showed no sign of recognition before returning his attention to the equipment. "Is that him?" Maggie whispered, nudging Sierra. "He looks so serious." "He is serious," Sierra replied, "but in a good way." The lights dimmed slightly as the ranger introduced Nathan, listing his credentials: master's degree in wildlife biology, 6 years of field research in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, publications in several scientific journals, and collaboration with the Shoshone Tribal Council on integrating traditional knowledge into conservation practices. When Nathan finally began speaking, his voice was exactly as Sierra remembered: deep, measured, confident, without being loud. He started with scientific data, population counts, territory maps, tracking methods, before transitioning to the impact of the January avalanche. Natural disasters don't just reshape landscapes, he explained, displaying a before and after map of wolf territories. They reshape relationships between predators and prey, between competing packs, between animals and the land itself. Sierra found herself leaning forward, captivated by the way Nathan wove complex ecological concepts into accessible narratives. He spoke about the wolves not as abstract research subjects, but as adaptable beings navigating a changed world. Western science often views adaptation as purely biological, Nathan continued, transitioning to a slide showing traditional Shoshone symbols alongside scientific notation. But my people have always understood that survival depends equally on community and connection. He described how the displaced wolf pack had initially scattered after the avalanche, but gradually reunited through complex communication and shared purpose. Using tracking data, genetic samples, and field observations, he demonstrated how the pack had not only survived, but reconfigured their territory to accommodate the altered landscape. "What we're witnessing isn't just instinctual behavior," Nathan explained, his passion for the subject evident in his usually reserved demeanor. "It's resilience rooted in relationship, with each other, with the land, with the rhythms of a world in constant change." The presentation concluded with recommendations for conservation practices that respected both ecological science and indigenous wisdom. As the lights came up for the question and answer period, Sierra felt a renewed appreciation for the depth of Nathan's commitment to these mountains and their inhabitants. Several audience members raised challenging questions about livestock predation and human-wolf conflict. Nathan addressed each with respectful attention, neither dismissing concerns nor compromising his position. His responses were thoughtful rather than defensive, informed by both data and lived experience. When the formal presentation ended, people gathered in small groups, continuing discussions or approaching Nathan with additional questions. Sierra remained seated, suddenly uncertain about approaching him in this public setting. Aren't you going to talk to him? Maggie asked, nudging her gently. Sierra hesitated. He's busy, and this is his professional world. I don't want to intrude. Sierra Morgan, Maggie said firmly, you didn't survive an avalanche and weeks of painful rehabilitation to sit here second-guessing yourself. Go thank the man properly. With a deep breath, Sierra rose from her seat, leaning on her cane more heavily than necessary. She made her way slowly toward the front of the room where Nathan was speaking with an older rancher, their conversation animated but respectful. As she approached, Nathan glanced up. For a moment, his professional mask slipped surprise and something warmer flashing across his features before his composure returned. He concluded his conversation with the rancher, then turned fully toward Sierra. Miss Morgan, he said formally, though his eyes conveyed recognition beyond her name. I'm glad to see you recovered. Not fully, Sierra replied, indicating her cane with a slight smile. But getting there. Your presentation was fascinating. Thank you. Nathan glanced around at the diminishing crowd, then back to her. I didn't expect to see you here. I received an invitation from the Forest Service, Sierra explained. And I wanted to thank you properly for everything. Nathan's expression softened slightly. No thanks necessary. I disagree, Sierra said quietly. The owl is beautiful, by the way. It watches over my apartment now. Before Nathan could respond, the Forest Service ranger approached, clapping him on the shoulder with collegial familiarity. Great presentation, Redfeather. The director wants a word before you head out. The ranger nodded politely to Sierra. Excuse the interruption, ma'am. Nathan hesitated, clearly torn between professional obligation and continuing their conversation. I need to take care of this, he said apologetically. Of course, Sierra replied, stepping back. It was good to see you again. Something like regret crossed Nathan's features before he nodded and followed the ranger toward a group of officials near the podium. Sierra watched him go, a familiar heaviness settling in her chest. Perhaps their connection had been circumstantial. After all, meaningful in crisis, but without place in ordinary life. She was almost to the door when she heard her name called. Turning, she saw Nathan striding toward her, having apparently excused himself from the officials. Sierra, he said, dropping the formality of their earlier exchange. Wait, she stopped, heart quickening as he approached. I'm sorry about that, Nathan said, his voice lower now that he stood directly before her. Official business. I understand, Sierra replied. You have responsibilities. Yes. Nathan glanced over his shoulder at the waiting officials, then back to her. But I also wanted to ask, how are you? Really? The genuine concern in his voice warmed her. Better every day. The doctors say I should regain full mobility, though I might always feel changes in the weather through the pins in my ankle. Nathan nodded. A permanent connection to the mountain. One of several, Sierra said, holding his gaze meaningfully. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken acknowledgments of their shared experience. Finally, Nathan spoke again. I'm leading a guided nature walk next weekend, educational program for the Forest Service about spring ecology in the lower elevations. He hesitated. Your medical restrictions might prevent participation, but perhaps you'd be interested in attending as my guest. The invitation surprised her. I think I could manage flat terrain with my cane, she said, trying to contain her smile. I'd like that. Saturday, Nathan said. 10 in the morning at the Taggart Lake trailhead. He produced a business card and handed it to her. My contact information, in case you have questions. Sierra took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. Thank you for the invitation and for checking on me at the hospital. Nathan's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes held hers. The owl seemed fitting, watchful guardian of the night. It was perfect, Sierra assured him, and the poultice helped immensely. A subtle smile touched the corners of his mouth. My grandmother would be pleased to hear that. The Forest Service director called Nathan's name, his tone indicating the conversation had been delayed long enough. I should go, Nathan said, but I hope to see you Saturday. You will, Sierra promised. She watched him return to the officials, his posture shifting subtly back into professional mode. Yet something had changed. A bridge extended between their extraordinary beginning and the possibility of something continuing in ordinary time. Outside the community center, Maggie was waiting by her car, curiosity written across her face. Well, she demanded as Sierra approached. What happened? You were talking forever. Sierra climbed carefully into the passenger seat. He invited me to attend a guided nature walk he's leading next weekend. Maggie's expression blossomed into delight. Sierra Morgan, is this a date with your wilderness rescuer? It's an educational Forest Service program, Sierra corrected, though she couldn't suppress her smile. But yes, he specifically invited me as his guest. As they drove through the quiet streets of Jackson, Sierra gazed toward the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. Somewhere in that vast wilderness lay the wolf den where she'd nearly died, the cabin where she'd begun to live again, and the paths Nathan Redfeather walked with quiet purpose. Their story had begun in extremity, in snow and survival and the shadow of death. Perhaps now it could continue in gentler circumstances, rooted in shared respect for the wilderness that had both threatened and saved her. Sierra fingered the business card Nathan had given her, tracing the embossed Forest Service logo and the simple contact information, a conventional beginning after their unconventional start. Yet as Maggie pulled up outside her apartment building, Sierra found herself looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation that felt both new and familiar, like returning to a place she'd only visited once, but somehow recognized as significant, like finding her way back to what mattered, just as Nathan had described the wolves doing after their world was shaken apart and remade by forces beyond their control. Saturday dawned clear and mild, the kind of spring morning that promised warmth. Without delivering fully on it, Sierra dressed in layers, a light thermal beneath a chambray shirt topped with a vest that offered warmth without restricting movement. Her rehabilitation exercises had improved her strength, but a day outdoors would test her endurance more than her apartment-bound recovery had. Maggie had offered to drive her to the trailhead, but Sierra had declined. This felt like something she needed to do independently, a deliberate step rather than one taken with assistance. She'd arranged for a ride share instead, giving herself extra time to arrive before the scheduled start. Taggart Lake Trailhead was already bustling when Sierra arrived. Several families with young children milled about, along with couples in hiking gear and a few solo outdoor enthusiasts. A Forest Service vehicle was parked prominently, its door emblazoned with the department logo. Sierra made her way to the gathering point, her cane sinking occasionally into the softer ground. She'd chosen sturdy hiking boots, despite her still healing ankle, needing the stability they provided. The morning air carried the scent of pine and wet earth, triggering memories of her last hike, the one that had nearly ended her life. She spotted Nathan before he saw her. He stood conferring with another Forest Service employee, a map spread between them. Even in standard-issue uniform, he stood apart, his presence contained yet commanding, his movements economical and purposeful. Dakota sat alertly at his side, the husky's blue eyes scanning the growing crowd. It was the dog who noticed her first. Dakota's ears perked up, his gaze fixing on Sierra with what seemed like recognition. He rose and trotted toward her, stopping respectfully a few feet away, tail waving in greeting. "Hello again," Sierra said softly, extending her hand for the dog to sniff. "Remember me?" Dakota pressed his nose briefly to her palm, then looked back toward Nathan, who had noticed his dog's departure and was now watching them. When their eyes met across the gathering space, Sierra felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. This was different from their chance encounter at the presentation. This was deliberate, a choice they had both made. Nathan excused himself from his colleague and crossed to where Sierra stood with Dakota. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would," Sierra replied, unable to stop her smile, "though I might slow the group down." Nathan glanced at her cane. "We'll be taking it easy. This is an interpretive walk, not a hike. Lots of stops for observation and discussion." His eyes met hers again. "But if you need to rest at any point, just let me know." The consideration in his voice warmed her. "I'll be fine. 3 months of physical therapy has its benefits." A family with 2 young children approached, the boys immediately drawn to Dakota. Nathan smoothly shifted into his official role, explaining that the husky was a working dog, but allowing the children to pet him briefly before directing them to the registration table. "I should finish preparing," he said to Sierra. "We start in 15 minutes. There's coffee at the welcome table if you'd like some." Sierra watched him return to his duties, noting how easily he interacted with the arriving participants, professional, but not distant, knowledgeable without being condescending. This was yet another facet of Nathan she hadn't seen during their forced intimacy in the cabin. By 10 o'clock, nearly 30 people had gathered for the nature walk. Nathan called them together, introducing himself and the program. Sierra stood at the edge of the group, leaning lightly on her cane as she listened. "Today isn't about covering distance," Nathan explained to the assembled participants. "It's about learning to see what's always been here. Spring in the Tetons offers unique opportunities to observe ecological transitions, from winter dormancy to renewed growth." He introduced his colleague, a botanist who would be pointing out early blooming flora, then explained the route, a gentle loop around Taggart Lake that would take approximately 2 hours with interpretive stops. "We'll be watching for signs of wildlife," Nathan continued, "though most larger animals will avoid our noisy group. Dakota is trained not to chase wildlife, but please keep children close and all personal pets leashed." As the group began to move toward the trailhead, Nathan caught Sierra's eye and gave her a slight nod, acknowledgement and reassurance in one small gesture. She smiled in return and fell in with the others, determined to complete the walk without requiring special accommodation. The path was well maintained and relatively flat, winding through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen groves just beginning to leaf out. Nathan led the group at an easy pace, stopping frequently to point out signs most hikers would overlook, a patch of disturbed soil where elk had pawed for early spring grasses, the distinctive scratch marks of a black bear on a tree trunk, the delicate tracks of a snowshoe hare still wearing its winter white. Sierra found herself captivated not just by the information, but by Nathan's way of conveying it. He spoke of the ecosystem not as an academic subject, but as a complex community of interdependent beings. The children in the group responded especially well to his straightforward explanations, their natural curiosity encouraged by his patient answers. At a viewpoint overlooking the lake, Nathan paused to discuss predator-prey relationships. Dakota sat alertly at his side, a living example of the canine adaptations Nathan described. "Wolves are often misunderstood," he explained, gesturing toward the distant ridgeline where he'd tracked packs. "They're portrayed as either villains or romanticized. Symbols, rarely as the keystone species they actually are, animals whose presence balances entire ecosystems." A rancher in the group raised questions about livestock predation, initiating a discussion that could have become contentious. Nathan handled it with remarkable diplomacy, acknowledging legitimate concerns while presenting data on coexistence. Strategies that had proven successful. "The goal isn't to prioritize wolves over human livelihoods," he said. "It's to find approaches that allow both to thrive. My ancestors understood this balance for thousands of years before ecological science had terms for it. Sierra watched the skeptical rancher nod thoughtfully, not necessarily convinced, but at least considering Nathan's perspective. It was a small victory in the often polarized conservation debate. As the walk continued, Sierra found herself falling, slightly behind the main group. Her ankle had begun to throb, the accumulated stress of uneven terrain taking its toll despite her careful steps. She paused beside a fallen log, taking weight off her injured leg while watching the others move. Ahead along the trail. "Need a break?" She turned to find Nathan beside her, having apparently noticed her lagging and doubled back. Dakota circled them once, then sat attentively. "Just a short one," Sierra admitted. "I might have been slightly optimistic about my hiking capacity." Nathan nodded, showing no judgment. "My colleague can lead for a while. Take whatever time you need." Sierra lowered herself onto the log, stretching her leg carefully. "I don't want to disrupt your program." "You're not," Nathan assured, her remaining standing but shifting to a more relaxed posture. "This is part of it, adapting to circumstances, respecting natural limitations." Sierra smiled at his framing. "Very diplomatic way of saying I overestimated my recovery." "I would have been surprised if you hadn't tried," Nathan replied, a hint of warmth in his tone. "You struck me as determined from the beginning, even when I was half frozen in a wolf den, especially then." Nathan's dark eyes held hers. "You'd already survived what should have killed you. That requires more than luck." The simple observation touched Sierra deeply. Nathan had seen her at her most vulnerable, injured, hypothermic, dependent on his help for survival. Yet he spoke not of her weakness, but of her strength. "I've been meaning to ask," she said, changing the subject slightly. "How are they? The wolves whose den I borrowed." Nathan's expression softened. "Adapting. Well, they've established a new denning site, about 3 miles northeast of the old one. The alpha female is pregnant. We're expecting pups within the month." "Life continuing," Sierra murmured. "Always," Nathan agreed. "Nature doesn't dwell on disruption. It incorporates change and moves forward." "Is that a Shoshone teaching or wildlife biology?" "Both." Nathan glanced toward the trail where his group had paused, while the botanist identified early wildflowers. "We should rejoin them soon. Are you able to continue?" Sierra rose carefully, testing her weight on the injured ankle. It protested, but held. "I can finish, just might need to go slower." "I'll walk with you," Nathan said. It wasn't offered as charity, but as simple companionship. They rejoined the group as the botanist concluded her explanation of glacier lilies and spring beauties, pushing through the recently thawed soil. The remaining portion of the walk followed a more level section of trail that curved gently back toward the parking area. Nathan resumed his lead position but maintained a slightly slower pace, occasionally glancing back to ensure Sierra was managing. She appreciated his awareness without finding it patronizing, a difficult balance he seemed to achieve effortlessly. As they approached the final interpretive stop, Nathan gathered the group in a small clearing. The sun had risen higher, warming the day enough that several participants had shed outer layers. "Before we conclude," Nathan said, "I'd like to invite everyone to experience this place through senses beyond sight. Knowledge comes not just from observation, but from connection." He asked the group to close their eyes and simply listen to the forest for 1 full minute. Sierra complied, letting her other senses expand to fill the space left by her temporarily abandoned vision. The experience was surprisingly powerful. Birdsong became more distinct, the whisper of wind through new aspen leaves more melodic, the scent of warming pine needles more pronounced. When the minute ended and people began to share what they'd noticed, Sierra remained quiet, holding the experience close. She opened her eyes to find Nathan watching her with quiet understanding. The walk concluded back at the trailhead, where participants thanked the guides and dispersed toward waiting vehicles. Sierra lingered, unsure of the protocol now that the official program had ended. She'd arranged for her rideshare to return in another half hour, anticipating the possibility of speaking with Nathan afterward. He approached after ensuring all participants had departed safely, Takoda still at his side. Without the audience, Nathan's demeanor shifted subtly, still composed but less formally so. "How's the ankle?" he asked. "Complaining, but I'll survive." Sierra smiled. "It was worth it. You're an excellent teacher. Thank you." Nathan glanced toward his Forest Service vehicle where his colleague was loading equipment. "I have to help finish up here, but—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Would you like to get coffee afterward? There's a place in town I sometimes stop at." The invitation surprised and pleased her. "I'd like that," Sierra said. "But I didn't drive myself. I could meet you there?" Nathan considered this, then offered an alternative. "I could give you a ride after we finish here, if that works for you." 20 minutes later, Sierra found herself in the passenger seat of Nathan's personal truck, a well-maintained, older model with a spacious cab that smelled faintly of pine and leather. Takoda rode in the back seat, occasionally pressing his nose to Sierra's shoulder in friendly greeting. "He remembers you," Nathan said, noticing the dog's attention. "Animals don't forget those they've helped. Is that why he tracked me? Some kind of rescue instinct?" Nathan navigated the winding road toward town with easy confidence. "Partly instinct, partly training, but mostly trust between us. He knew I was looking for something important." They arrived at a small cafe on the outskirts of Jackson, the kind of local establishment tourists rarely discovered. Inside, the atmosphere was welcoming without being precious. The furniture, sturdy wooden tables and chairs that had witnessed years of conversation. Nathan chose a corner table with good sightlines to both door and window. It struck Sierra as the choice of someone accustomed to awareness of his surroundings, never quite off duty, even in civilian clothes. "I come here when I need to write reports," he explained as they settled with their coffee. "Quieter than most places in town." Sierra wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I have a similar spot at the library, back corner desk near the local history section. Nobody bothers me there." The conversation flowed with surprising ease, moving from their shared appreciation for quiet spaces to books they'd found meaningful, from Sierra's library work to Nathan's ongoing research, without the pressure of crisis or the constraints of a public program. They discovered connections beyond their dramatic first meeting. "May I ask something personal?" Sierra ventured after a comfortable lull. Nathan nodded, his expression open if cautious. "You mentioned your parents wanted different paths for you than what your grandfather taught. Is that tension still there?" The question was direct, but Sierra sensed it touched on something fundamental to understanding him. Nathan considered his answer carefully. "It's evolved," he said finally. "My father wanted me to have opportunities he didn't. College education, professional career, financial security. He saw my interest in traditional ways as moving backward. But you found a way to combine both," Sierra observed. Eventually, Nathan's fingers traced the rim of his mug. "After my grandfather died, I realized knowledge was being lost that couldn't be replaced. Scientific papers documenting traditional practices preserved the information but not the connection." He paused. "It was never about rejecting education. It was about integrating different kinds of knowing. And your parents now?" "My mother understands," Nathan said. "My father respects that I've made my own way, even if it wasn't what he envisioned. We've found some peace with it." Sierra appreciated his honesty. The lack of simplified narratives or easy resolutions, like the wolves adapting to disrupted territories. Nathan had found his path not by rejecting change, but by incorporating it mindfully. "What about you?" he asked. "The avalanche changed your path. Where does it lead now?" Sierra hadn't expected the question to be turned back on her so directly. "I'm still figuring that out," she admitted. "Before the accident, I was just existing, doing my job, taking solo hikes, keeping to myself." She met his gaze. "Now I'm questioning whether that's enough." "And is it?" "No," Sierra said with sudden certainty. "I don't think it is." Nathan nodded, not pushing further but accepting her answer as significant. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared understanding that went beyond their extraordinary meeting or their separate professional worlds. Outside the cafe window, afternoon light gilded the distant mountains. Sierra realized they'd been talking for nearly 2 hours, the time passing unnoticed in the flow of genuine conversation. "I should get back," she said reluctantly. "I have library planning meetings tomorrow." Nathan nodded, settling their bill despite her protest. "I'll drive you home." The ride to Sierra's apartment was companionable, conversation giving way to uncomfortable silence. When Nathan pulled up outside her building, Sierra found herself reluctant to end their time together. "Thank you," she said, "for the nature walk, the coffee, the conversation." "Thank you for coming," Nathan replied simply. Sierra gathered her courage. "I'd like to do this again, if you would." Nathan's expression warmed, the reserved mask slipping to reveal something more personal. "I would, very much." As she carefully exited the truck, Sierra felt a lightness that had nothing to do with her healing ankle and everything to do with possibilities opening before her. Nathan waited until she reached her building entrance before driving away, a gesture of consideration that seemed characteristic of everything she was learning about him. Inside her apartment, Sierra placed her hiking boots carefully by the door. Muddy, but broken in again after their first post-accident use. The carved owl watched from its perch on the windowsill, wooden eyes witnessing her return. "We're finding our way," she told it softly, "like your wild cousins after the avalanche changed everything." Outside her window, the Tetons stood eternal. Against the deepening afternoon sky, the same mountains that had nearly claimed her life now watching over her rebirth. Sierra Morgan had entered them as one woman and emerged as another, not despite Nathan Redfeather, but alongside him. What began in crisis was transforming into something chosen, deliberate, and full of quiet promise. The seasons turned with quiet persistence. Spring softened into summer, drawing tourists to the national parks and keeping both Sierra and Nathan busy with their respective roles. Their relationship developed in measured steps: coffee after Nathan's conservation presentations, dinners when their schedules aligned, occasional walks on the gentler trails as Sierra's strength returned. By July, Sierra had abandoned her cane entirely. Her gait still held a slight irregularity that became more pronounced when she was tired, but the orthopedic surgeon had pronounced her recovery remarkable. Physical therapy had transitioned from rehabilitation to strengthening, preparing her for a gradual return to more challenging hikes. "You've done the work," her therapist told her during their final session. "But remember to respect your limits. That ankle will always tell you when a storm's coming." Sierra had laughed at that. A built-in barometer, useful for a hiker. On a warm evening in late July, Sierra sat on her small balcony watching thunderheads build over the mountains. Her ankle ached with the pressure change, a dull throb that she'd learned to interpret as accurately as any weather forecast. Rain would come before morning. Her phone chimed with a text from Nathan. "Still on for tomorrow?" "Weather looks questionable." Sierra smiled at his consideration. "Unless you're worried about melting." "I've heard Shoshone hunters are waterproof." His response came quickly. "Waterproof but not lightning-proof. Alternative plan, my cabin." I need to check it before the fall hunting season anyway." The suggestion sent an unexpected flutter through Sierra's chest. Though they'd been seeing each other for months now, their relationship had progressed with deliberate slowness. Nathan had never pressed for more than she offered, and Sierra had appreciated the space to heal both physically and emotionally after her near-death experience. But the cabin held significance beyond a mere change of location. It was where they had first truly connected, where Sierra had begun to see Nathan beyond his role as rescuer. "I'd like that," she replied after a moment's consideration. "What time?" They arranged details, and Sierra returned her attention to the gathering storm. The mountains disappeared behind veils of rain, distant lightning illuminating their hidden contours. The sight no longer filled her with unease, as it once had. Respect, yes, she would never underestimate the mountains again, but not fear. Nathan arrived precisely at the agreed time the next morning, Dakota in the back seat as always. The promised storm had passed, leaving behind washed skies and air that smelled of wet earth and renewal. Sierra greeted both man and dog with equal warmth, having developed a genuine affection for the husky who had tracked her through the snow. Months earlier, "I brought hiking boots," she said as she settled into the passenger seat, "just in case the weather holds." Nathan glanced at her approvingly. "Good call. The trail to the cabin is gentle enough for your ankle if you're feeling up to it." The drive took them out of Jackson and into the foothills, following winding roads that climbed steadily into the Tetons. Sierra watched the landscape change from town to farmland to forest, each transition marked by subtly shifting light and vegetation. When they reached the small parking area where the Forest Service road ended, Sierra stepped out to breathe deeply. Of the pine-scented air, memories of their first journey to the cabin surfaced. She was barely conscious on a makeshift stretcher, Nathan navigating treacherous snow, but they felt distant now, like scenes from someone else's story. "Different perspective from last time," Nathan observed, reading her thoughts with uncanny accuracy. Sierra nodded. "Last time I wasn't exactly taking in the scenery." The trail to the cabin wound gently through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen, groves muddy in places from the previous night's rain, but easily navigable. Sierra moved with growing confidence, her reformed ankles supporting her without complaint on the relatively even terrain. Nathan walked beside her rather than ahead, adjusting his naturally longer stride to match hers. They talked easily about their respective work, Sierra's new community literacy program at the library, Nathan's ongoing wolf research that had recently been featured in a national conservation magazine. The article generated some funding, he explained as they rounded a bend in the trail, enough to expand the tracking program and hire a research assistant. "That's wonderful," Sierra said. "Will you train them in both the scientific and traditional approaches?" Nathan nodded, pleased by her understanding. "That's the goal. Finding someone who respects both ways of knowing isn't always easy." When the cabin came into view, Sierra paused, struck by how different it appeared in summer light. No longer a snow-shrouded shelter against death, it stood solid and inviting among tall pines, its timber walls weathered to a soft silver grey. A patch of wildflowers bloomed beside the porch steps, their purple and yellow blossoms nodding in the gentle breeze. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's home," Nathan replied simply. "Or one of them." Inside, the cabin was much as Sierra remembered. Spare, yet comfortable, with the same stone fireplace and practical furnishings. But summer light through open windows revealed details winter darkness had hidden. Intricate beadwork on a wall hanging, the fine grain of hand-built furniture, a collection of carved animals similar to the owl Nathan had given her. "My grandfather made most of these," Nathan explained, following her gaze to the carvings. "Taught me when I was young. Said working with your hands connects you to what matters." Sierra ran her fingers lightly over a cedar wolf, feeling the smooth contours shaped by patient hands. He was right. There's something grounding about tangible creation. Nathan moved to open windows, letting the summer breeze circulate through. The cabin. I need to check the roof and chimney. Make yourself at home. There's water in the cooler if you're thirsty. Left alone, Sierra explored the cabin more thoroughly than her injured state had allowed during her previous stay. The bookshelves revealed volumes on ecology, indigenous history, wilderness survival, and surprisingly poetry. Dog-eared collections by Mary Oliver and Gary Snyder, suggesting frequent reading. A small desk beneath the window held neat stacks of field journals and maps. Beside them lay a leather-bound book, whose handwritten title caught Sierra's attention: Traditional Ecological Knowledge of the Eastern Shoshone, Plants, Animals, and Land Relationships. That's the project I mentioned, Nathan said, returning. Through the door, documenting my grandmother's and grandfather's teachings alongside current scientific understanding. May I? Sierra asked, gesturing toward the book. Nathan nodded. That's why I brought you here. I wanted your perspective. Sierra opened the volume carefully. Inside, Nathan's precise handwriting filled page after page, interspersed with detailed drawings of plants, animals, and landscapes. Traditional names appeared alongside scientific nomenclature, usage notes beside biological classifications. It was neither purely academic nor simply practical. Instead, the work honored both ways of understanding the natural world, finding complementary insights rather than contradictions. This is remarkable, Sierra said, turning pages with growing appreciation. It bridges worlds that are too often kept separate. That's the intent, Nathan replied, a rare hint of uncertainty in his voice. But I'm not sure if the format works, whether it honors both traditions without diminishing either. Sierra considered this as she continued examining the manuscript. Her librarian's eye noted organizational strengths and areas that might benefit from clearer structure, while her personal perspective appreciated the work's unique approach. I think it succeeds, she said finally. It feels integrated, not forcing either perspective to conform to the other's framework. She looked up at him. Have you considered publishing this more formally? It could be valuable for conservation, programs, indigenous studies, even public education. Nathan joined her at the desk, their shoulders nearly touching as they both looked down at the open manuscript. The Tribal Council has expressed interest in preserving it for community use. The University Press in Laramie has made inquiries. He hesitated. But I wanted your professional opinion before proceeding. The trust implicit in this request touched Sierra deeply. I'd be honored to help however I can. The library has resources for local authors, and I have contacts in academic publishing from my university days. Nathan nodded, his expression reflecting gratitude beyond the practical assistance offered. Thank you. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of mutual respect that transcended their extraordinary beginning or their growing personal connection. They stood on common ground now, two professionals recognizing value in each other's expertise. They spent the afternoon reviewing the manuscript together, Sierra offering suggestions about organization and accessibility, Nathan explaining the cultural context behind certain entries. When hunger eventually interrupted their work, Nathan prepared a simple meal of trout he'd caught and frozen earlier in the season, accompanied by wild rice and foraged greens. They ate on the porch, watching. Shadows lengthened across the clearing as afternoon edged toward evening. Takoda lay nearby, occasionally lifting his head at distant sounds only canine ears could detect. I've been thinking, Sierra said during a comfortable lull in conversation. About what you said that first night in the cabin. About everyone. Deserving to be found. Nathan's expression grew attentive. What about it? I've realized it applies to more than physical rescue. Sierra chose her words carefully. Before the avalanche, I was lost in a different way, going through motions without real connection. The accident forced me to depend on others, to accept help, to rebuild. The strongest recovery isn't done alone, Nathan observed. No, Sierra agreed, it isn't. And I'm grateful that you were the one who found me, not just in the wolf's den, but after. When I was trying to figure out who, I was beyond survival. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. In my tradition, there's a concept that difficulties come not as punishment, but as teachers. The avalanche taught you something you needed to learn. And what did it teach you? Sierra asked softly. The question seemed to surprise him. Me? You were part of it too, she reminded him. Your life changed direction when Dakota found me in that den. Nathan considered this with characteristic thoroughness. It taught me that some things are worth risking everything for, he said finally. Even when the odds suggest you'll find tragedy instead of miracle, the simple honesty of his answer moved Sierra deeply. Acting on instinct rather than calculation, she reached across the space between them, her fingers finding his. Nathan's hand turned, enfolding hers, the contact warm and grounding. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, neither feeling the need to define or label what was growing between them. It had begun extraordinarily, but was developing naturally, a connection rooted in shared experience, but flourishing through genuine compatibility. As twilight deepened toward dusk, Nathan built a small fire in the outdoor pit, its flames creating a pocket of golden light in the gathering darkness. Sierra leaned back in her chair, gazing upward at stars emerging in the clear mountain sky. Sometimes I dream about it, she admitted quietly. The avalanche, the cold, the fear. Nathan nodded, unsurprised. That's normal. The body remembers. Trauma even when the mind moves forward. The dreams are changing, though, Sierra continued. They used to end with me alone in the dark. Now they end with finding light, with being found. Healing happens in layers, Nathan said, like the forest after fire. First come the smallest plants, then sturdier growth, eventually new trees. The scars remain in the landscape, but life returns. The poetic practicality of his perspective made Sierra smile. Is that wildlife biology or Shoshone wisdom? Just observation, Nathan replied with a small smile of his own. And hope. Later, as the fire burned down to embers, Nathan asked the question that had hovered unspoken between them. Will you hike again? In winter, I mean, when the snow returns. Sierra watched the sparks rise toward distant stars. Yes, she said without hesitation. Not alone, though, at least not yet. I know these mountains in every season, Nathan said, quietly. When you're ready, I'd be honored to show you winter trails that respect your experience without awakening fear. The offer represented everything Sierra had come to value about Nathan, his respect for her autonomy alongside his willingness to support her healing journey, not pushing, not holding back, simply walking beside her at a pace that honored both. Their paths. I'd like that, she replied. When the snow returns. Morning arrived with the clear, crisp quality unique to mountain altitudes. Sierra woke on the cabin's small bed, the same one she'd occupied during her recovery, to find Nathan already up, moving quietly about the main room as he prepared coffee. Sleep well? He asked when he noticed her stirring. Sierra nodded, stretching, carefully. Her ankle felt good despite yesterday's hiking, another milestone in her continuing recovery. Better than last time I slept here, she said with a wry smile. Fewer reasons for nightmares, Nathan agreed, bringing her a steaming mug. They shared a simple breakfast before packing up to return to town. Nathan needed to file reports at the Forest Service office. Sierra had committed to an afternoon children's program at the library. Yet neither seemed eager to leave the peaceful isolation of the cabin. As they stood on the porch, preparing to depart, Sierra found herself reluctant to close this chapter of their evolving story. The cabin represented both crisis and connection, the place where she had begun to heal and where their relationship had first taken root. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing me back here, for transforming what this place means." Nathan's expression softened with understanding. "Places hold the energy we bring to them. This one has seen both struggle and healing." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "I'd like you to consider it yours too, whenever you need mountain, silence, or starlight." The offer carried significance beyond the practical sharing of space. It was an invitation into his most private world, the place where his dual heritage found harmony. "I'd be honored," Sierra replied simply. They hiked back to the trailhead, in companionable silence, the morning sun warming their shoulders. Dakota ranged ahead, occasionally circling back as if checking on their progress. At one point, the trail opened to reveal a stunning vista of the Teton Range. Sierra paused, taking in the majestic peaks that had nearly claimed her life, and subsequently transformed it. The mountains appeared different now, no less powerful or deserving of respect, but no longer objects of fear. "They're beautiful," she said softly. Nathan stood beside her, his presence steady and grounding. "Yes," he agreed. "And so is survival." Sierra glanced at him, finding his gaze already on her rather than the mountains. The simple honesty in his expression told her that he wasn't referring only to her physical survival of the avalanche, but to everything that had followed: the hard work of recovery, the courage to rebuild, the willingness to connect rather than withdraw. As they continued down the trail, Sierra reflected on the strange alchemy of disaster and rescue. The avalanche had buried one version of herself and uncovered another. Nathan had found her in a wolf's den, but in many ways she had also found herself there, stripped to essentials, forced to recognize both vulnerability and strength. And Nathan himself, the quiet, competent man walking beside her, had transformed in her understanding from mysterious rescuer to complex, thoughtful companion whose presence in her life felt increasingly essential. When they reached the trailhead and loaded into Nathan's truck for the drive back to town, Sierra found herself looking forward rather than back. Not to forget the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting, but to honor them by creating something meaningful from their foundation. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked as they drove down from the mountains toward Jackson. Sierra watched the landscape transition from wilderness to civilization, each mile bringing them closer to their separate daily lives, yet not diminishing the connection forged in more extreme circumstances. "That some journeys only make sense when you look back at the path," she replied, "and that I'm grateful for every step that led here, even the painful ones." Nathan reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers with quiet certainty. "The path continues," he said simply. As they drove into town, the Tetons rose behind them, eternal, magnificent, and no longer threatening. They had taken everything from Sierra, and then, through Nathan, given back something unexpected and precious. She had survived a mountain avalanche in a wolf's den until a Shoshone hunter tracked her through snow. But the true miracle wasn't survival alone. It was what came after. The slow, deliberate building of connection, the discovery that some bonds, once formed in crisis, could flourish in ordinary light, and the understanding that sometimes being truly found means recognizing the hand extended across darkness and having the courage to reach back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.